Christmas morning, the lights were already on when I came into the living room. Too bright, too early. The kids were on their knees on the rug, still in pajamas, hands hovering over the gifts, like they were waiting for a signal they didn't know how to name yet. Paper crinkled. Someone laughed in the kitchen. Then the front door opened again. My mother-in-law, Evelyn Cross, stepped back inside, coat still on, purse still on her shoulder. She didn't apologize for interrupting. She didn't look surprised to be there. She walked straight to the tree. She knelt down in front of my children and began picking up the gifts. Not one, all of them. Boxes, bags, tissue paper sliding onto the floor as she gathered them into her arms. No one spoke. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. When she stood up, she looked at me and said evenly, "Put them back. I paid for them." The room stalled. My husband, Noah, stayed on the couch. He didn't stand. He didn't say her name. He didn't look at me. His hands rested on his knees, like he was waiting for the moment to pass on its own. I didn't argue. I didn't laugh like it was a joke. I didn't ask what she meant. My children stopped reaching. That was the sound I remember. Not a noise, the absence of one. 4 small hands pulling back at the same time, like they'd learned something without being taught. Evelyn turned toward the hallway and started walking. Noah stood up and followed her. He took a stack of boxes from her arms without a word and carried them out of the room. No one looked at the kids. No one explained. I stayed where I was. The tree lights hummed. Wrapping paper lay open on the floor, with nothing left to open. Someone in the kitchen asked if the coffee was ready. Nothing had been discussed. Nothing had been negotiated. But something had been decided. In that moment, authority in my family was declared. Publicly, clearly, and it wasn't mine. The gifts were gone. No one asked me anything after that. I'm Claire Morgan. I was 31 that winter. At family gatherings, I stayed useful. When a comment landed wrong, I stood up. When voices sharpened, I refilled drinks. When Evelyn corrected someone mid-sentence, I smiled first so the moment could move on. She noticed. "Claire knows when not to push," she'd say, while passing food, already looking past me. People laughed. Someone nodded. The room kept going. After the gifts were carried out of the living room on Christmas morning, no one looked at me. Evelyn poured herself another drink. Noah followed her into the hallway. An aunt asked if anyone wanted coffee. I went into the kitchen. I cut apples, made sandwiches, wiped the counter. When my daughter asked why her present was gone, I crouched down and said we'd talk later. She nodded and went back to her cousins. The day kept moving. Decisions happened quickly. When to leave, where the kids would sit, what was best. I wasn't included. I was informed after. That night, my phone buzzed. A family group text. Plans for the next day. Times. Locations. Evelyn had written, "Everyone's on board." I hadn't been asked. Noah read the message over my shoulder. He didn't comment. He set his phone down and turned on the TV. The next morning, Evelyn told me she'd already signed the kids up for an activity, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. She said it calmly, like it was helpful. I nodded. From that point on, things arrived decided. Schedules, pickups, changes. I adjusted. I worked around them. No one checked first. I didn't object, not out loud. And after that, no one waited. Silence wasn't politeness anymore. It was permission. I hadn't agreed to anything, but things were already moving without me. Noah didn't cause the silence. He benefited from it. After Christmas, after the group text that skipped my name, after Evelyn signed the kids up for something without asking, Noah didn't question any of it. He didn't ask why I hadn't been included. He didn't say it should have gone differently. He treated it like logistics. At Christmas, he stayed on the couch. His phone was face down on his leg, one foot locked under the coffee table. When Evelyn bent down and lifted the gifts, he kept his eyes on the floor. Not briefly, long enough for the moment to finish without interference. The kids froze. Evelyn stood back up. The gifts left the room. Noah stayed seated. Later, when the living room cleared, he started closing things out, wrapping paper into a trash bag. Plates stacked, a chair pushed back into place. He moved with the calm efficiency of someone ending a normal day. I watched him do it. This was familiar. In our marriage, when tension appeared, Noah didn't meet it head on. He let it pass through the house without engaging it. Conversations ended unfinished. Decisions settled themselves. Whatever required confrontation simply resolved elsewhere. So things kept moving. Plans changed without discussion. Conversations ended before I entered them. When Evelyn spoke, Noah leaned back and let her finish. When decisions landed, he accepted them, already formed. No one argued, no one checked, nothing stopped. That night, he brushed his teeth while I stood at the sink, kissed my cheek, asked if I was tired, turned off the light before I answered. He fell asleep, quickly, like nothing was pending. He never asked if I was okay. After that, I stopped listening to what he said and started watching what he allowed. How often he stayed out of conversations that involved me. How rarely he interrupted anything his mother set in motion. How easily he lived inside outcomes he hadn't shaped. I waited for a correction. One sentence, one interruption, one moment where he stepped between us. It didn't come, because not interrupting is a choice. At Christmas, Noah chose not to step in. And that choice didn't end there. It showed up again and again, in smaller moments, quieter ones, until it became the shape of our marriage. That was when the last option disappeared. If I didn't stop this, nothing would. Waiting hadn't kept the peace. It had handed it over. 6 months after our second child was born, Noah lost his job. He told me in the kitchen while the kids were napping. Laptop open, email still on the screen. He said there had been layoffs. He said his role was cut. He said it wasn't personal. Temporary, he added, already closing the laptop. That evening, I logged into our accounts. I moved money from savings to checking. I canceled a weekend reservation. I delayed one payment that allowed a grace period. Noah sat across from me, scrolling through job listings, reading titles out loud without clicking them. The next morning, I picked up an extra shift. Then another. I changed my schedule so I could cover daycare pickups if interviews came up. I started paying bills the day they arrived, instead of stacking envelopes by the door. Mail shifted. Statements came addressed to me. The daycare emailed me about a balance. When the credit card company called, they asked for my name. Noah forwarded messages instead of answering them. He stayed home. At first, his laptop stayed open on the table. Resume drafts, job boards, notes. After a few weeks, the screen dimmed more often. Phone calls moved to the porch. When I asked how things were going, he said, "Still waiting to hear back?" One afternoon, the bank called while Noah was in the next room. I answered. They asked for verification. I gave it. When I hung up, Noah looked in from the hallway and asked, "Everything okay?" I said yes. He nodded and went back to his screen. After that, nothing redirected. Calls came to me. Emails stayed with me. When something needed a decision, it landed on my side of the table. Not because we discussed it, because that's where it stopped. Groceries, school fees, appointments. I handled them. If something cost more than expected, I adjusted elsewhere. I didn't ask first. I fixed it after. When Noah needed money, he mentioned it casually. Sometimes he didn't mention it at all. Transfers became routine. Fast. Unremarkable. I noticed when he stopped checking balances, when he stopped opening mail entirely, when money questions turned into statements. "You've got it, right?" Weeks passed, then months. Noah talked about future work without dates or numbers. I stopped asking for them. When bills were late, I explained delays to people who had never needed explanations before. At some point, I realized the house had reorganized itself. Not emotionally, not dramatically, operationally. Money moved one way. Decisions followed it. Responsibility stayed where it landed. No one announced a new arrangement, but it was already being used like one. And once that happened, the old balance wasn't missing. It was no longer available. Noah was home more after he lost his job. He was in the living room when I passed through, at the table when I packed lunches, in the bedroom when I folded laundry. He answered questions. He nodded at the right moments. He listened just enough to signal presence, but nothing reached him. I began editing myself before speaking. I tested sentences silently, trimming them down so they wouldn't sound like requests. I chose timing carefully, not before meals, not late at night, not when his phone was nearby. When something bothered me, I delayed it. When I delayed it long enough, I dropped it. Touch changed first, not abruptly, gradually. He hugged me with one arm while still looking at his screen. He kissed me on the cheek while reaching for his keys. At night, he turned away quickly, already half asleep. When I shifted closer, he said he was tired. I stopped trying. Dinner became quieter. We talked about logistics, pickups, appointments, weather, things that ended cleanly. If a conversation risked stretching, Noah checked his phone. If it slowed, he stood up and started clearing plates. I let him. The kids noticed before I did. They waited longer before asking questions. They stood closer to doorways. They watched Noah's face before speaking, the way people do when they're gauging whether now is the right time. One night, my son stood at the edge of the kitchen with his homework folder pressed against his chest. He waited while I rinsed a plate. He waited while Noah scrolled on his phone. "Dad?" he said, quietly. Noah didn't look up right away. My son shifted his weight, opened the folder, closed it again. "It's fine," he said, and walked back to his room. I didn't call him back. I stayed at the sink longer than necessary, rinsing a plate that was already clean. Noah didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. Later that night, Noah asked if I wanted to watch something. I said maybe. He started a show without waiting for my answer. 10 minutes in, he laughed at something I hadn't followed. I laughed too, half a second late. After that, I stopped initiating conversations that didn't have an endpoint. I stopped asking questions that might require him to stay present. I learned which topics kept things smooth and which ones caused him to retreat. The house adjusted. Doors closed more often. Headphones stayed on longer. The kids finished sentences faster. When something went wrong, they fixed it themselves, if they could. When they couldn't, they waited. Silence stopped being something we used to avoid conflict. It became the default, and it didn't stay between adults. That night in the kitchen wasn't dramatic. Nothing was said. No one raised a voice. No rule was announced. But something was learned. That was the first thing my children took from us. The consulting client came through on a Thursday. Noah told me while I was loading the dishwasher. He didn't sit down. He didn't wait for a reaction. He said the company name, then added that it was short-term, decent pay. He said it like news that needed to be handled carefully. Money came in the following week. Not enough to fix anything. Enough to interrupt the fear. That Saturday, Noah cooked dinner. He didn't ask what I wanted. He took vegetables out of the fridge, set a pan on the stove, turned on music. He moved through the kitchen with focus, like someone proving a point without saying it out loud. When he passed behind me, his hand brushed mine. Casual, familiar. We ate at the table instead of the couch. After the kids went to bed, he poured 2 glasses of wine and sat close enough that our knees touched. He leaned in. He smiled more easily. When I didn't pull away, he squeezed my fingers. "We're back," he said. I didn't challenge it. That night, I slept through without waking up to check my phone. The next morning, I didn't open the banking app before making coffee. I noticed the absence of that habit only later, when it was already gone. I stopped checking. The days that followed were easier to move through. Noah talked about potential clients. He played with the kids in the evenings. He stood behind me while I cooked and commented on the food. When I asked how much the client had paid so far, he gave me a number quickly, without looking anything up. It sounded right. Later, when I asked again, he waved it off. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's basically the same." He closed the laptop and changed the subject. I let it go. There were small moments I noticed and didn't follow. A notification he flipped face down. A call he took outside. A sentence that stopped when I entered the room. I registered them, then moved on. Comfort made that easy. It filled the space where attention had been. Weeks passed. The routine settled. The client was mentioned less often. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't track deposits. I didn't open statements when they arrived. I stacked them by the door and told myself I'd look later. Later felt reasonable. By the time something shifted again, the habit of checking was gone. Not paused, gone. I had traded it, not for certainty, for quiet. And once I realized what I'd given up, it wasn't available to take back. That decision cost more than money. The statement arrived on a Monday, tucked between a grocery flyer and a school notice, thin enough to miss if I hadn't already been standing at the counter, sorting mail the way people do when they believe things are finally steady again. It wasn't addressed to Noah. It was addressed to me. I didn't open it right away. I set it down, finished what I was doing, told myself there was no reason to rush. Comfort has a way of teaching you patience at exactly the wrong time. When I finally slid my finger under the flap, it was almost casual. $14,300. The number sat there without drama. No warning language, no explanation. Just a balance that didn't belong to any story I recognized. I went looking for Noah. He was in the living room, laptop open, half listening to something playing in the background. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I placed the statement on the table between us and waited for him to look. When he did, his face changed immediately. Not confusion, recognition. He started talking before I asked anything. Words tumbling out too fast, like they'd been waiting. He said it was temporary, that it wasn't as bad as it looked, that he'd meant to tell me, just not yet. He said he didn't want to worry me while things were finally improving. Then he cried, not loudly, not performatively, just enough to signal remorse, without clarity. He said he was protecting me, protecting us. That stress wouldn't help anything. Evelyn arrived later that afternoon, drawn in by a phone call I hadn't heard. She listened quietly while Noah spoke again, slower this time, rehearsed. When he finished, she nodded once and looked at me. "Families absorb stress together," she said, calm and certain, like this was a principle she'd lived by for years. I didn't argue. I didn't agree. That night, as I threw the empty envelope away, something caught my eye. The crease along the seal, the faint tear where paper had already been parted and pressed back into place. I held it for a moment longer than necessary. Someone else had opened it before I did. No one mentioned that part. No one needed to. My finances were no longer private, and I was no longer ignorant. The relief I'd been living on collapsed quietly into responsibility. Knowing didn't make me safer. It didn't give me leverage. It gave me ownership of the number, of the silence around it, of what would come next. Knowing didn't make me safer. It made me responsible. After that, Noah promised transparency. He said it while rinsing a coffee mug. Back turned to me, voice steady enough to sound rehearsed. He said we'd be more open, that there wouldn't be surprises anymore. He said it twice, like repetition could stand in for detail. What changed was not what he shared, but what he avoided. Screens tilted away when I walked into the room. Tabs closed too quickly. Numbers referenced without being shown. If I asked how things were looking, he answered with direction instead of data. Better, improving, managed. He stayed busy. Phone calls taken outside, emails typed late at night. When I passed by, he minimized windows and smiled, as if to reassure me that nothing needed my attention. I didn't push. At dinner, Evelyn began filling the gaps. Groceries appeared, without discussion. A new pair of shoes, for our daughter, already in her size, already paid for. School fees, handled before I'd even opened the email. Each gesture arrived complete, requiring nothing from me, except acceptance. Don't worry about it, she'd say, handing over a receipt I hadn't asked for. It's easier this way. Easier came with instructions, pickup times, activity choices, what made sense, what didn't, decisions packaged as help, too smooth to refuse without sounding ungrateful. Noah didn't intervene. He thanked her. He let it stand. One night, we were folding laundry in the living room, the TV murmuring to itself, socks paired, shirts stacked, the ordinary choreography of a house pretending to settle. Noah reached over and squeezed my wrist, light and familiar. You trust me, right? He asked. The question didn't sound defensive. It sounded tired, like he needed something simple to hold on to. I nodded. He exhaled, shoulders loosening, as if something heavy had just been put down. The conversation ended there. No follow-up, no clarification. Trust had been accepted as a substitute for proof. After that, the pace quickened. Evelyn started paying for things before I knew we needed them. School forms returned, already signed. Appointments scheduled without checking my calendar. The kids began repeating phrases I hadn't taught them. Grandma said it's easier. Daddy said it's fine. I watched control shift in small, efficient movements. Not taken, reassigned. I still handled the day-to-day. Packed lunches, homework, bedtimes. But the larger decisions, the ones with numbers attached, were happening elsewhere, already resolved by the time they reached me. Trust had changed shape. It wasn't something shared. It was something requested. And once given, it became permission. Permission to proceed without me. Permission to decide on my behalf. I noticed how often I was being informed instead of asked. How often my role was to agree after the fact. How quickly gratitude replaced consent. By the time I understood what was happening, my signature wasn't the only one being used. Trust was now something I gave, deliberately and quietly, while control moved farther out of reach. I could feel it slipping, not dramatically, but efficiently, like paperwork processed without review. I didn't know how much had already been signed. I pulled a full credit report on a Wednesday morning, after dropping the kids off at school. I didn't tell Noah I was doing it. I didn't frame it as a conversation. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and answered the security questions one by one. Former addresses, old phone numbers, things I hadn't thought about in years, all still attached to my name. The number appeared near the top of the page. $48,600. I scrolled, looking for context that might soften it. Multiple accounts, different dates, my name on every line. Authorized, active, current. I recognized the handwriting on the digital signatures, mine. When Noah came home, I turned the screen toward him. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't ask how I got it. He looked once, then sat down, like he'd been expecting this moment to arrive eventually. It was safer this way, he said. You're better with money. He said it like an explanation, not an apology, like the decision had already been categorized as practical. I asked if his mother knew. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Evelyn's calm made sense now. The timing of her help, the confidence with which she handled expenses that weren't hers, the way she spoke about money like it was already organized. I checked the joint account next. There was nothing in it. Not frozen. Not delayed. Empty. Money had been moved carefully. Not in a rush. Transfers completed. Access changed. The account wasn't a mistake. It was a conclusion. That night, my daughter climbed into my bed after lights out. She curled against my side and stayed quiet longer than usual. When she finally spoke, she lowered her voice. Daddy says not to ask Grandma, she whispered. It makes things worse. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need clarification. I lay there, listening to her breathing slow, replaying the sentence until it settled into place. This wasn't just about debt, or decisions made without me, or trust misused. This had reached the children. They were learning when not to ask, who not to trouble, how to stay out of the way. Silence wasn't something they observed anymore. It was something they were practicing. I understood then that nothing in this house was neutral. Staying meant teaching them how to disappear. Staying meant modeling caution as survival. There was no version of this where I waited it out and fixed things quietly. No outcome where time solved what structure had already locked in. The number wasn't the worst part. The lesson was. Leaving was no longer optional. Staying was dangerous. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for an explanation that would make it sound better. I didn't list what had been done or wait for the right moment to bring it up calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lower it either. The next morning, after the kids were dropped off, I sat in my car and called a lawyer. I gave her my name. I said I needed to separate finances. I said there were accounts in my name I hadn't opened knowingly. She asked for dates, amounts, access. I answered each question once. I didn't defend anyone. I didn't soften anything. That afternoon, I opened a new account. Then another. I redirected my paycheck. I canceled automatic payments one by one. Mortgage draft, credit cards, subscriptions. I changed passwords, updated recovery emails, removed shared access. Each confirmation screen closed behind me cleanly. No one noticed when things stopped going through. He asked what I was doing. I told him what would no longer happen. That was the entire conversation. Evelyn called later. I let it ring. She left a message. Her voice was controlled, concerned, already arranging the narrative. I deleted it without listening to the end. After that, the house got quieter. Not tense, not heavy, clear. There were no arguments because there was nothing left to negotiate. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. They asked fewer questions at first, then different ones, practical ones. What day was whose? Where things went? Who picked them up? A year passed. Christmas came back without warning. It always does. The tree was smaller, the living room less crowded. There weren't stacks of boxes under the branches. No dramatic wrapping. No display meant to prove anything. But there was no fear. The kids sat on the rug again. No one hovered. No one corrected them. No one waited to see who was allowed to touch what. I handed them their gifts myself. Each tag had their name written in my handwriting. They didn't hesitate. They opened things slowly, talked while they did, asked questions out loud. When something broke, they brought it to me instead of hiding it. When they needed help, they asked without checking anyone's face first. Later, my daughter asked why this Christmas felt different. I didn't explain everything. I said, being kind does not mean keeping everyone happy. She nodded like it answered something she'd already been carrying. That night, after they were asleep, I sat alone in the living room, with the lights off, and let the quiet stay where it was. It didn't ask anything from me. It didn't demand adjustment. I hadn't won. I hadn't been forgiven. But the doors were closed. On purpose. From my side. Families don't fall apart when someone leaves. They fall apart when someone is used. And no one stops it. I stopped it. And that was enough.